right, gang, welcome back to another episode of Uncontested. My name is Rob Johnson. I'm your guest host this week yet again, and joining me is the man behind the show, Sean Lohman. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing well. So Sean, today we are talking about a topic that I think a lot of people would assume is only applicable to a certain segment age range, but actually is applicable to people who are of all ages pretty much. So on today's show, we're talking elder law and Medicaid asset protection. So with baby boomers being, in the age range of 58 to 76 right now, obviously this is a pretty significant topic. But as I mentioned in the open, this is something that is applicable to people, I would say, from ages 18 and up. Is that right?
Absolutely, Rob. And this is something that I've been getting a lot of emails on, and I just had a client in yesterday. So it's who's doing planning for his mom, and that's where this comes into play most of the time. It's not just the person who's staring down the barrel of the admissions office for a nursing home facility. But so many times, and I would say it's more than 50% of the people that contact me about the subject are the kids, people whose parents or grandparents are looking at going into a nursing home facility and are looking at losing everything that they've worked their entire life for, just to pay for a nursing home, and really are looking at going broke, because that's what Medicaid does. They make you go broke before they'll help contribute to your nursing home care. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it's a good topic, and it's super relevant. And I know some listeners that might think like, well, it's applicable, but not applicable right now. And I will say, based on the last several topics you've done, if your affairs are not in order on these fronts, or if you're not aware of some of the logistics of this, from personal experience, it's much easier to get in front of it than it is to try and sort it out after someone has passed and you're left holding the bag. And now you're racing the clock because all of this stuff has to be done quickly.
That is more true about this topic than it is almost anything we've discussed. Because if you can plan in advance, out, as we'll discuss over this episode and the next episode, planning in advance provides you so much more protection than if you come in at the last second, mom's going into the nursing home, and we're having to do what we call crisis planning. At that point, you lose a lot of potential. We can still help you, but you lose a lot of the tools that we have that can provide that protection for you or for your loved ones that are facing a nursing home admission. Mm. So, this is what we call elder law. A lot of people call it elder law. We call it Medicaid asset protection. But, what is it? It's estate planning, but it's estate planning that we do for individuals who are older, or who are at risk of facing a nursing home expense, a long-term care expense, and protecting those assets, everything that they've worked their entire life for, from being depleted and spent on these long-term care costs. So this planning can be what we call proactive planning, which is when families come in before their loved one has to go into a nursing home, and they want to proactively protect their assets from having to be paid for nursing home care, and therefore preserved and protected for their beneficiaries, their kids, their grandkids, whoever they're leaving their assets to. Planning can also be crisis planning, which this happens far too often to people we see. And this is when no advanced planning has been done. And then mom falls, she breaks a hip, or breaks a leg, or she's developed progressive memory issues, and she has to go into a long-term care facility. And then her adult kids come running in and they say, this is what mom's income is. These are the assets she has. How do we keep mom from spending all of this on nursing home care? How can we force Medicaid to pay? Can we protect everything she's worked hard for from being exhausted due to this long-term care and these long-term care costs? And we can do that. And we serve both types of clients. We do both proactive planning and we do crisis planning. And that's basically what elder law or Medicaid asset protection amounts to. And Rob, I don't know if you've ever had a loved one go into a nursing home facility, but I have. And my grandmother went in years and years ago when I was young, before I ever did estate planning. I think I had just come out of law school, and my grandmother went into a nursing home facility, and I watched as everything that she had got depleted. And I mean everything, all of her savings, her investments. She owned apartments with rental income, all had to be sold to pay for her long term care costs, with the exception of her condominium, which had to sit there empty for years because if it was sold, Medicaid would have required that money to be used toward her long term care costs. So I've seen how devastating and how terrible this can be for a family. In Kentucky, and I think that this is true of most of the states between the coasts. In Kentucky, our average cost for a nursing home is about $107,000 per year. It's just under $9,000 per month on average. That's an average nursing home. Memory care costs can run $10,000 to $12,000 a year. So imagine $120,000 to $144,000 a year for memory care. So if you don't have income that meets or exceeds that monthly cost of $9,000 to $12,000, then what happens? Who pays? Well, you still have to pay if you have over $2,000 in assets. And you can imagine at those rates, it doesn't take long for someone to spend everything in their entire estate, their life savings, on nursing home care, rather than being able to pass that down to their beneficiaries, their kids or their grandkids. So it begs the question, what about health insurance, right? Or Medicare? Doesn't that pay? I know that I know somebody who had a hip replacement or a knee replacement. You know, at our age, we know people that are getting knee replacements, and they went into a nursing home facility and their health insurance paid, or if they were on Medicare, Medicare paid. Doesn't that pay? And the answer is no, not for long-term care, not for long-term nursing care. After 20 some odd days, I believe it's 28 days, uh, Medicare will no longer pay. So long-term insurance policy may pay, but even most of those policies are limited in what they'll pay daily and for the duration of what they'll pay. So Medicaid, Medicaid is the only program that will provide payment for these nursing home expenses. Medicaid, most of us have heard of Medicaid. It's run by the state. It's a federal program, but it's administered by the state. It's the only governmental program that will pay. But basically, Medicaid, if you'll think about it, is a poverty level program. You only qualify for Medicaid if you're at or below that level. So you cannot have assets of over $2,000 and income that does not exceed $2,523 per month. So if you have assets over 2,000 and you show income over $2,523 per month, you do not qualify for Medicaid. But that's where we come in, because we can help you qualify. And even though you have these assets and even though you have this income, we can plan so that when Medicaid looks at what you have, it looks as if you do not have these assets and your income is below that amount. So let's address the income issue first, because that's probably the easiest of the issues to address. First, what's included by Medicaid as income? Well, cash from family and friends, veterans benefits, employment wages, alimony payments, and here's where it hits most people: pension payments, Social Security retirement income, or Social Security disability income, IRA withdrawals, and stock dividends. So as you can imagine, most people will exceed that $2,523 per month income cap. Usually, I can tell you from my experience, that usually comes from people who are getting Social Security and they get some sort of a 401k distribution or a pension distribution, or they're having to take an IRA distribution. There are people that will leave their IRAs intact, but Medicaid requires you to take that required mandatory distribution. So you can't just sit there and say, well, I'm not taking any Medicaid income, so it can't be counted. Oh no, Medicaid looks at that IRA and they say, well, because of your age, what is that required mandatory distribution? We're going to count that towards your income. So there is good news though, and we have ways to direct that income so that Medicaid doesn't count it as income, uh, and uh, and and it's not going to exclude you from Medicaid eligibility. And those are tools that are given to us by the federal government. So the same federal government that sets the rules on the income limits also gives us the qualified income trust, which is also called a Martin trust, Martin trust. And your income goes through this trust and it's not included for purposes of qualifying for Medicaid. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next episode, but we're going to put that income issue aside and just know that um, there is a way for us to get your income below that income limit.
It's insane how you have like the government obviously wants standards when people are qualifying for social programs, but then also we're also going to set, loopholes in place or programs in place to circumvent that. So at a certain point, it's like, well, why even have the standards as they are? It seems like, do you ever feel like it's a bit of conflicting information? Not that the government ever confuses people. We all know that's
Well, yeah, it is confusing. And just like the person that was in my office yesterday who was trying to plan for his mom, he said, why doesn't everybody do this? And why isn't this known? He had no idea that this was even available until he went into a nursing home and the nursing home administrator said, you need to go see Sean Lohman. And so he came in to start doing this for his mom. And I said, that's a really good question. But it is something that is given to us by the federal government, and I get it. And it's almost as if, you need to know who to go to, or you need to know who to reach out to. You need to know that this even exists uh, to take advantage of it. And it's unfortunate because I'll tell you, uh, it seems like the people who are in that, $100,000 of assets to three, four, $500,000 of assets, people who are in that range are the ones who are hurt the most. Now we can protect people who have more than that. We can protect their assets, but these people that are in that 100 to $500,000 range, imagine, we just talked about they've got uh, they've got income of a certain amount. Anything over and above that, they're going to be required to pay out of their assets. Well, at $107,000 to $120,000 per year, it doesn't take long before you go through everything that those people have. Not long at all.
right.
And
Yeah.
so, if somebody has several hundreds of thousands of dollars of assets, it doesn't impact them as much as the people that have that one or two or $300,000 of assets, right? Because theirs is going to be gone in less than 2 years sometimes. So,
Yeah.
and and so that's what we do. If you're going into a nursing home and the person going into the nursing home has over $2,000 of what Medicaid calls includable assets, they have to get rid of those assets. They have to either use the cash and pay it down, or they have to sell assets and then use the money that they made in selling the assets until they show less than $2,000 before Medicaid will kick in a penny. So this is scary stuff, Rob. For a lot of people out there, they're getting older. Their parents are getting older. It's like you said, they could be in their 60s or 70s and above. And the likelihood of nursing home care is literally staring at them, or at least it's getting closer. Um, but an
Yeah.
experienced estate planning attorney can help, just like we talked, and we can figure out what to do with those assets, and through planning to exclude those assets from Medicare consideration and force. I said Medicare, I meant Medicaid consideration, and force Medicaid to pay for those long-term care expenses. And that way, everything that you saved for your entire life, um, the retirement and the home and all of those things you've worked for, you can pass down to your kids and your grandkids. So, the first question I think most of the time, and I think a lot of people are probably wondering, well, what's included as an asset? What does Medicaid consider toward those assets, toward that $2,000 maximum, toward that 2,000 maximum? Um, and in this podcast, we're going to look at those assets that Medicaid would consider and not consider when determining what you have to spend down toward your long-term care. And then in the next podcast, we're going to talk about the steps we can take to protect those assets. And I have to say, fair warning, let's talk about what you don't want to do as we talk about these assets, as we talk about what's included on Medicaid. Don't consider running out and immediately trying to transfer these assets. A lot of times people say, well, I'm going to immediately transfer these assets into my kids' names,
Yeah.
or I'm going to add my kids on as co-account holders, or add their name onto my home, or do something crazy like this, because Medicaid's not stupid. Medicaid, will comes back, and the first question on the Medicaid asset or on the Medicaid application is, have you made any gifts in the last 5 years?
Yeah.
And so you have to disclose any gifts you've made in the last 5 years, and Medicaid is going to say, okay, well, we're going to consider those as your assets, and you're going to be required to spend those down before we'll pitch in anything. So don't go out there and start trying to transfer assets, because it just doesn't work.
Well, it's almost like a do it yourself. Like people are just trying to do the DIY version of estate planning. And it's like, well, if when I file the application, if I just transferred this over, whether it's through a quick claim deed or whatever, and then I move this cash over here, surely no one's going to know. And it's like, well, there's paper trails for literally everything that you're about to do.
Well, not only that, Rob, you could transfer the assets, and you could say, okay, we're going to have an agreement that you're going to pay for my long-term care, because it's probably going to get yanked back into my qualified estate by
Yeah.
Medicaid. So, but I'm going to transfer these assets to you. Well, guess what you've just done? You've just included those assets as your child, as part of your child's estate.
Mhm.
So if your child ends up having creditor issues, or judgments against them, or lawsuits, bankruptcy court, potential ex-spouses, all of those assets that you just transferred to your child are subject to all of those things. They are not controlled by you. They are controlled as part of your child's estate. And this is why, yes, it's good to know what assets are included by Medicaid for consideration, but the most important step is the appropriate planning for those assets, not doing it yourself, like you said, so
Yeah.
that you can qualify for Medicaid, preserving your assets and maintaining control over those assets. And so that
Yeah.
planning part we're going to talk about in the next podcast.
And real quick, just to add in here, Sean, I have a quick story on this. When my someone in my wife's family had passed away, and she went through this situation, and what happens, or what I saw happen, is there's a lot of people that they want to try and help, so everyone hits Google search and they start, oh, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, and it can get overwhelming. And that's when you start to feel like, well, we need to do something now. And for whatever reason, talking to an estate planning professional doesn't necessarily pop up on that list first. It's like, well, we need to just transfer all these assets first. We'll ask proper questions later.
Right, exactly. And don't forget that when you transfer the assets into somebody else's name, you could also disqualify them from
Mhm.
governmental benefits.
Sure.
Um, so you have somebody who's on Medicaid, or even somebody who's fine today, and you transfer them an asset to try to get it out of your name. If that person then has an issue down the road, and they have a problem where they need to be qualified for Medicaid because they need assistance in their life, well, Medicaid then is going to require them to spend that asset down, because guess what? It's their asset. It's part of their estate. So you may have just disqualified somebody else from potentially qualifying for Medicaid.
Yeah.
So, what assets does Medicare consider when determining whether or not you qualify? And so there are It is most of the assets that you can think of, as you can imagine. Your checking accounts, your savings accounts, anything that would have a cash value to it or that holds cash. Brokerage accounts are an example, certificates of deposit, stocks and bonds, savings bonds. Now, your primary residence is an included asset if you do not intend to return home. Now, if you
Mm,
intend to return home, then it's not an included asset. But if you do not intend to return home, then it is included by Medicaid. And if your primary residence has more than $636,000 in equity, then you do not qualify. So you can imagine that if somebody has paid off their home, they've worked their whole life to pay this asset off, we would need to do something with that residence to protect it from Medicaid consideration, to get it
mm,
excluded by Medicaid as an asset. If you have rental property, and I know a lot of people around here do have rental property, my gosh, Airbnbs have become huge, right? VRBO properties have become huge. The first $6,000 of the rental property is exempt, but the rest of the equity is available to Medicaid.
wow.
Uh, Limited partnerships are included. The cash value of life insurance, if the total face value of all your policies is greater than $1,500. So anything over $1,500 in the face value of your life insurance policies is included as an available asset to Medicaid, included asset to Medicaid. Vehicles, other than one excluded vehicle. So you can have one vehicle, but extra vehicles are included as available assets. Boats
Mm,
and recreational vehicles, unless one is your primary residence, which I think is kind of funny, but here we are. Um, so, so you can live on this beautiful boat, and if that's your residence, it is not included as an asset for Medicaid purposes. However, if you don't live on a boat and you're just using it for the weekends or for recreational purposes, it is an includable asset. And I can tell you that with the beautiful lakes we live around, there are some several $100,000 houseboats that are out there that people own, and those are included assets.
wow.
You want to take care of those assets so that they are not included as part of your included estate by Medicaid. Loans that other people owe you, right? I mean, if you've got, I had somebody come in the other day, and every one of their children they've loaned money to, and they have agreements with their children, though that those are assets for Medicaid purposes. They're going to look at those loans and they're going to say, "Oh, we're going to include those." Deferred annuities and some immediate annuities, depending upon how they're structured and when they were purchased, they can be included assets, and retirement funds if some conditions are not met. So, all of those assets that I just talked about are included by Medicaid and must be used, spent down, sold, and the cash used until those assets are under $2,000 before Medicaid will kick in a penny toward your long term care expenses. So let's have an example. You have mom who's getting older and she's done basic estate planning, but she has not done elder law or planned for Medicaid asset protection. So she hasn't planned for what happens if and when she ends up needing to go into the nursing home. So
Mm,
she has income, which is she has some income of about $3,500 a month. She has a home that she owns. It's worth $150,000. She has $5,000 in her checking account. She has $25,000 in CDs and other small investments. And she has $50,000 of stocks that were left to her that she's never cashed. And she has a whole life policy with a cash value of $25,000. So her Medicaid assets that are going to be included by Medicaid are $105,000. Her checking account, her CDs, and her investment accounts, her stock and her cash value of the whole life policy. Those are all included assets. Her home and car are not included as long as she states that she intends to return home. So basically, mom would be required to sell and spend $103,000 of her assets, leaving about $2,000 to
mm,
pay for her long term care, which wouldn't even get her a year in Kentucky, right?
sure.
But if mom doesn't intend to return back to her house, Suddenly, her included assets are $255,000 because the value of the home gets added as an included asset. And then she has to spend down $253,000 of her assets. And this is really important. If mom's kids decide that they don't want to keep up this home, so, the guy yesterday who came in, he said, if mom goes into the nursing home, we don't want to maintain the home. We don't want to keep paying for insurance. We don't want to put new roof on it. We don't want to keep paying for taxes, and we don't want to pay for the upkeep and all of that. So if the kids decide, mom goes into the nursing home, and the kids decide we're going to sell the home because it looks like she's going to be there for a while, and we don't want to keep it up. Well, suddenly the home, which was not an included asset, has been converted to cash, and now it is included. And all of that cash has to be paid toward her long term care. So, what assets does Medicaid not consider? And what do they not include toward that $2,000 limit? Well, the primary residence, as long as you intend to return home, equity of $6,000 in income producing rental property, one vehicle, life insurance that has no cash value, um, irrevocable burial contracts. So if you prepay for a funeral expense, that's a good way to get assets out of your estate. I mean, that can cost up to $10,000. So that's a good way to remove some money from your estate. $1,500 designated on burial expenses and one burial plot for family member. That's it. Those are the assets that are not included by Medicaid. So I hope you can see that the majority of a person's assets out there, they're going to be included by Medicaid, and they're going to count toward that $2,000 maximum limit that Medicaid has set. So where's the good news, right? There is good news. And that's what we spoke about earlier, that the same laws that set these rules give us ways around the rules. And so the government gives us a way to set up these assets, to recharacterize these assets, if you will, so that they're not included by Medicaid. And they also give us ways to treat the income so that it passes through a qualified income trust or a Martin trust, so that when Medicaid looks at it, they say, oh, they're not making over the maximum limit that we've sent. So, we go through these assets with clients, we go through their income, and using these statutes, we recharacterize all of this and we get them qualified for Medicaid. And hopefully it's on a proactive basis. And this, what does this do? It's just like basic estate planning to everybody out there. It lets you go through your life knowing that everything that you've worked for, everything that you've worked to protect, everything that you've worked to build up in your estate, that it's going to those people that you've worked for all your life, whether it's your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews, whoever you want it to go to, charities, it's going to them, and it's not going to be spent on your nursing home costs. So, our next podcast, we're going to talk about some of the tools that we use to protect our clients' assets to maximize their Medicaid benefits. And I want to emphasize, if you're over 65, or if you have a loved one who's over 65, this is a topic for them. This is a topic that they need to learn about, or you need to learn about if you've got somebody who you want to provide this protection for. And we do free family wealth planning sessions where we meet with people, we go through their assets, and we walk them through this. We walk it through, I'm giving out examples in the process of this podcast, but we walk through their actual assets, how we can protect those, hopefully on a proactive basis, but if necessary, on a crisis basis, and how we can maximize the protection of their assets for those people that they're leaving behind. And in having that, I just see the face of people when we're done doing this planning, and the peace of mind that it gives them, knowing that everything that they have is protected. And it's a great feeling for me as somebody who can provide that service for them.
It's also got to be a nice thing too, that when people are in crises and people are going through this, to have so many different people that say you need to go see Lohman. That's who you need to go see to get this fixed.
Well,
So
and
that
it
has to
happens
be
more and
nice.
more. It does.
Yeah.
It happens more and more. More people that I've planned for who go into nursing facilities. And when the people find out that we are the ones that did their planning, word starts spreading. You need to go see these people because it's worked for them. And,
Yeah.
and that's the best kind of, referral we can get.
Yeah. Just as a side note, I talked to a friend of mine in Louisville the other day, and he asked me some of the shows that I've been working on, and obviously yours is one of them. And he had said, "Who are you working with?" I told him Sean Lohman, and the only thing he said was great reputation.
Oh, that's
So
nice. Well,
so
that's great. That's
yes,
well, I come from, and if you've listened to my podcast before, I am a third generation lawyer in my family, and they my family's worked really hard for that reputation. Working with our clients one on one, not assigning clients to a staff member. Everything we do directly with our clients. You meet with me. I do your planning. I draft your plan. When you're signing the plan, I'm there and I deliver the plan to you. And so you're always going to deal with a lawyer in my office. And we try to give that personal experience to everybody. And so I'm glad to hear that you've heard about our reputation from up in Michigan.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
great.
absolutely,
So, next week we're going to be talking about how to plan to protect your assets, the different tools we use. And so I encourage you to come back. If you know somebody who can benefit from this, have them listen to this podcast and then, subscribe to our podcast so that you get notified when the next one comes out that's going to talk about actually how we're doing the planning itself.
absolutely. And for the listeners, if you're an audio listener, just be advised that there is a video version of this as well available on YouTube. And likewise, if you're only finding this on YouTube, we are on all of the major platforms: Apple, Spotify, Google, and iHeartRadio. So be sure to check out the show there. Sean, thanks so much for walking us all through that today.
Thanks a lot, Rob. I appreciate it. And hey, this is going to be playing when the leaves are falling in Kentucky. So what better thing to do than to listen to a podcast while you're raking leaves, right?
Absolutely. It gets you through all those leaves.
That's right.
All right, guys. Well, yes, have a great week, and we will catch you on the next episode. Take care.